One of my mentors said once that God created us as embodied beings on purpose. And what we do with our bodies then kind of matters. And that kind of begs the question, does how we learn and our posture in learning actually drive us to have maybe an understanding of our relationship to what we're learning? I asked that question because today on the Celebrate Kids podcast, in our daily segment, Face in the Dark, we're going to talk about how we learn mathematics. And is it actually beneficial sometimes for us to teach mathematics to our kids using movement and activity rather than just having numbers be kind of a concept that they kind of engage in? I think that there's some interesting insights here, and I'd like to hear more from Dr. Kathy. So let's turn there now.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So, Dr. Kathy, many math educators are praising building what they're calling procedural fluency from conceptual understanding. Essentially, they kind of say that students build conceptual understanding from concrete experiences that can include working with manipulatives in mathematics. Things like moving their bodies through space and using as many of their senses as possible when they're learning specifically mathematics. Many highlight that this progression from concrete experiences to procedural fluency doesn't always happen in a day or two or even a year. Children develop many reasoning schemes from birth through the age of 8. And as they construct their concept of numbers, they kind of construct them as a composite unit. Then multiplicative reasoning is built from the foundational concept of numbers as things made up of things that can be broken apart and put together in many ways, at which point students are then able to break numbers into different units. They can then begin to make sense of negative units and fractional units and algebraic units, but they all use thinking structures that were built early in elementary school. And now many education experts are encouraging us to kind of have kids move their bodies during these times. Now, Dr. Kathy, this is kind of intense, and there's a lot of philosophy and even large words that carry a lot of weight when we're saying them. But I want to kind of highlight this because I think this move by some teachers to really incorporate more physical movement for students so they kind of get an understanding of mathematical units in kind of physical space is really powerful. I think that might even help some of us understand what the national debt means. When we talk about trillions and we talk about how many steps we took in a day, we can kind of understand that's a lot of steps. And if every step was $1, man, that's a lot of steps. I think that, doing this can really kind of help kids. And I wonder if it kind of makes numbers really more relatable, more than just kind of a philosophical concept. What do you make by this move by many teachers right now that are working to teach mathematics for kids?
I'm fascinated by it, and I'm going to look into it more now that you've introduced me to this language. I've never heard of procedural fluency, but that's fascinating. And I would be an advocate of anytime we can get kids out of their desks and get them moving, it's going to benefit body-smart children. It's going to benefit nature-smart children to go outside. I know of moms and dads and teachers who use sidewalk chalk and have children make a square or a rectangle or a circle on a playground or a driveway and then divide it up and say, okay, now divide it into fourths and divide that into eighths. And now let's make that one circle. What if we had a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3? What would that look like? And watching the kids think it through and get their bodies moving and using their large motor skills. This is how a lot of little kids in particular move. And I think it's so fascinating that they're finding that if young children are able to understand these concepts in more of a physical, all-body way, that it's going to help them even when they're doing, algebra in grades 8, 9, 10, and 11. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, I love this idea of kind of being active and moving. And part of the reason I love it is because, well, as a man who was a boy and is really raising boys right now, it was really important for me to be active in school. But I can imagine that trying to do this with a plan and with a purpose is really kind of challenging, right? It's how do we teach kids to use their bodies appropriately now in mathematics, not just in the line as they kind of line up for recess or in their home as they're kind of preparing for dinner or what have you, right? So what advice would you give to parents who might be trying to incorporate this kind of concept for especially for kids that are body smart? How can we kind of guide them well in this as we also have maybe a little bit of an objective for them to use their bodies, knowing that for many, especially young boys, it's going to be maybe unruly at times?
That's a fair question. It may be unruly at times because they don't have self-control. They can obviously lack impulse control. They can get overly excited. And yet I would say to counter that, when we honor who they've been created to be and we allow them to move, and measure their feet and their hands and their fingers and, whatever, rather than a boring worksheet that has them measure with a ruler, they're going to be motivated, inspired. They're going to be less invisible. And so they're going to be more engaged with the teacher, with the homeschool mom. And then I think the disobedience goes down. So I think when they're allowed to move on purpose, the movement that is disruptive decreases. So I'm a huge fan of this. Go find 6 things in the room to measure that are under 6 inches long. Now go find 6 things that you need more than one ruler to measure because they're so long. Who's not going to enjoy that? I would enjoy that. And I would look to see if I could find something to measure that no other kid in the class found. So I think it's fabulous.
I love that. I really love that, Dr. Kathy, especially maybe because, math is really hard for our family. It's kind of the hardest subject for my kids, kind of the hardest subject for me and my wife. And I think it might be because we really have, I would say, probably a very creative home. We enjoy, natural things, structure and organization and paying bills, and mathematics are kind of a chore for us, right? It takes a lot of work or energy for us to do those things. What would you say to parents who don't naturally kind of build homes that celebrate specific subjects, especially when it might kind of foster this idea inside of kids that, I've even heard my kids say, Stenders don't do math well. I don't want that to kind of be a self-fulfilling prophecy. How can we kind of, shape our homes to be places where all subjects are kind of celebrated, even when it's not something that we naturally do?
Yeah, that's really important because that we teach at the ministry that identity controls behavior. So when all of you say, hey, Stenders don't do math well, then your kids are shocked if they earn a good grade, and they're probably not going to tell you for fear that they're no longer going to be a Stender, And I know that wouldn't happen, but and certainly, you want someone in your family to be good at math because you guys are going to want somebody to help take care of you when you age old, right? So, and obviously there are things that are genetic. There are things that are, if you guys are interested in creativity, then, praise God for that. And your kids are going to change the world through more of the creative arts and the way that they creatively think through problem solving. And we need that as well. So there is genetic, there is interest, there's I like this, I'm good at this. If kids don't see mom and dad read, the kids aren't going to read as well or as much in recreation. If they see that you don't do math in your head and you're always relying on a calculator, then you have that conversation with them. Nothing wrong with that at all. I think I think family values matter here, right? And it's okay to say that in our family we value creativity. So this is why we want you to always take an elective that's from the creative arts. And this is why we go to more art museums and we spend more money on, artistic endeavors and things like that. Nothing wrong with that. Your kids who are capable of earning an A in math better earn an A. And if everybody in your family is capable of a B, then you celebrate that B. Otherwise, it'll become a C. And let me throw this idea out there as I wrap this up. You can be creative in math. I remember saying to children things like, how many different ways can you put numbers together to equal 11? And Wayne, you could work on that for hours. There's hundreds of possibilities. So maybe another way that you and your wife could handle this is to look at the creativity that actually is in algebra, geometry, and the basic math skills. That's a challenge.
I really loved this conversation that I got to have with Dr. Kathy today. It reminded me of a passage out of Deuteronomy chapter 6, and I'm going to begin reading at verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and you shall talk to them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. I love this passage because I think it kind of goes to the fact that God has really created us as people to take his knowledge and the understanding of the world and really the knowledge of who he is and his love for us. And then it's supposed to be something that we kind of bring out in the world, that it's active and it's engaged in the world. And in doing that, we have a better understanding of the lessons and the knowledge and the wisdom and actually the character of God because we see it expressed and practiced in the world around us. It's kind of a funny passage when we start to think about it through the lens of mathematics and what we were talking about today, that maybe being active with what we're learning and having kind of a physical presentation of it can drive us to have a better understanding of what that thing is. And so when we look at building faith in our kids, maybe the same kind of lesson applies. What if we were active with our faith? What if we took steps to be bold with our faith in the grocery store, or as we walk along the road and meet people, or as we're going to the bus stop, that we be people who purposefully, actively work to love our neighbors? And what would that look like then? How do our kids understand love when it's not just something we talk about in a devotional time, but it's actually something that we practice and live out? I think doing that is going to bring a bright light to some of the challenging concepts that our kids are going to engage. And that's going to help us face the dark. I want to thank you for listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast in this, our daily segment, Facing the Dark. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook, my name is Wayne Stender, and I want to say thanks for listening, and I'm looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.